Hey guys, it's Shawn. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to talk about why states matter so much in U.S. business law, right? So if you are an outsider, maybe you're new to business law, you might be somebody outside the U.S., or maybe you're in the U.S. and you keep wondering, why do people talk about what state you form your company in? Why does it matter whether it's a Delaware corporation or a Wyoming corporation or a Florida corporation? Why do people keep talking about this? Maybe you've seen this referenced in contracts or agreements, right? You might see that referenced in terms of service or other documents you're reviewing. XYZ Corporation, comma, a Delaware LLC or a Delaware corporation. You'll see this often in there, and it really often makes people wonder, why does it matter so much? This will give you some pointers and tips. It'll explain to you why this issue is critical, but it'll also give you some going forward points so that you could maybe make some better decisions when it comes time for you to form your companies, grow your companies, expand your companies, perhaps relocate your companies. Why these state law things matter so much and why it's so important in U.S. business law that the state of organization or the state reference matters so much. As always, not legal advice. This is just educational, give you some tips, give you some ideas. You can then consult an attorney you're choosing for actual legal advice tailored to your situation. Our goal here is just to entertain, inform, get you up to speed. Laying at the bottom of all of this in the U.S. is what we call the internal affairs doctrine. And that's something that courts have developed over time to basically say that for a given company, the internal affairs, what happens within the company, will be governed by, generally speaking, the state of formation, state of incorporation, state of formation. So we respect the laws of the other states, right? This is a hallmark of the U.S. legal system, is that we generally, our court system wants to respect what happens in other states. Each state has its own court system, but generally what they want to do is give deference and respect to the other states. And similarly, with the internal affairs doctrine, what the courts have said is if you are a corporation, LLC, etc., formed in a particular state, we may be in a different state when we, as a court, if we are dealing with that company, but we're going to respect the internal affairs being governed by the laws of that particular state. So, for instance, if you're in Maryland and it's a Maryland court, in general, they're going to respect a Delaware LLC or Delaware corporation who's doing business in Maryland. Their internal affairs are still going to be governed by Delaware law, right? And we see this happen throughout the U.S., right? So this internal affairs doctrine is very important to understand that the courts have deemed that we are going to respect the state law, the corporate law, the LLC law, whatever other law an entity may be formed under. Each state is going to respect that law of the other state if it's called into question. They're not going to apply their own state laws. They're going to generally go back to the state law of where the entity is formed. And all of this is important because the U.S. has what we call a federal system. We have this dual sovereign system. We have the U.S. federal government, and then we've got all these separate states, and then, of course, like District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, these special situations too. But each one has its own governing system, and we allow each system to function separately, and each state is empowered to create its own laws, have its own rules, and each state has then gone out within its power to do acts within its state to create business laws. Each state has said, okay, we're going to have corporations, we're going to have LLCs, and they're going to establish that, right? But because of this federal system, the LLC corporation exists at the state level, not the federal level, right? So that means we have to look across into the other state, again, with that internal affairs doctrine, right? So this is why it becomes very important. And you generally register at the state level. There are very few entities that are registered at the federal level, right? Some national banks, some other exceptional cases, but businesses are generally formed at a state level, not the federal level, right? So again, this is another reason why these states have to work together, why they have to have this, right? And for a business of any scale, you're generally going to start crossing state lines, right? So a lot of times it's just not a matter of choice. For a small business, you may be making that choice to incorporate in a different state because you want to use the internal affairs, you want to use some privacy protections, maybe the other state presents, or whatever reason, you might be choosing to form a different state. But when you're a big company of scale, what you're going to find is you're going to start crossing state lines, right? And so they have this system called foreign qualifications. If you're interested in that topic, drop me a note. I can do a video talking some about foreign qualification. But the general concept is if you're an entity in state A and you start doing business in state B, you have to start foreign qualifying. So you're going to have to pick a state and register in that state, and you're going to start crossing over all these other states as your business expands, and you may start foreign qualifying in all these states, but you're still going to be looking back to the internal affair doctrine in whatever that state was that you actually formed in. So because of this registration at the state level, that becomes a big deal because you are going to go back to that. That's why people think so much about it. And the state laws do decide some things. These corporate and LLC laws look similar across states in many ways. The concepts have kind of been copied from each other. Some have used model acts, groups of law professors and informed people, created what they thought would be the best practices, told people to start adopting that. And some states have adopted versions of these model acts. So some states, they have very, very similar provisions. But no matter what, your state is going to still determine some things. And it may make a difference. I've had times where that state law can matter. Maybe it's on how a vote happens for something, how something's authorized, how you do something with written consent. If you want to do something without meeting, that can vary from state to state. Dissolution provisions can vary from state to state. So the states do decide some things. So that's why it's important that you get that right. And that's why people do look to these states. And some outside investors, some people coming into a company, may say they only want to deal with certain states. I've certainly seen this with certain investors. They want to go to a particular state for a particular reason. For one reason, some investors like to invest in Delaware entities, not because Delaware is so great. Delaware, a lot of people think it's because of taxes. That's not the driving force most of the time. What the driving force is that if you're an investor and you're investing in companies, you want to know the rules of the game. And so it's easier in many ways for an investor to say, let's invest all in Delaware companies. That way we don't have to worry about these nuances and these state law differences, right? We'll know Delaware. We'll invest in Delaware companies. That way when corporate issues come up, we don't have to start our analysis with getting a lawyer in another state that we're not familiar with, right? And some investors prefer that, right? So I do know there are investors out there that will, always say we want to invest in Delaware, and they will even sometimes, in the case of a significant investment, ask the company to relocate, and that is another thing you can do. You can do what they call a conversion. It's available in many states now. You would need 2 states that both have a conversion statute, but what you can actually do is move the state of formation or incorporation through legal documents. And you can also do this potentially through a merger or other avenues too if you can't do a conversion. But most states, or I think many states definitely have a conversion statute now. And so I've actually seen investors wanted entities converted in order to move it. So some investors do definitely have a preference. And that's another reason states become very important. And so another factor is uncertainty of future. We've mentioned here several times Delaware. I'm licensed in Delaware. That's where I began my practice. Delaware is kind of the default state for kind of big companies. Most of them form in Delaware. One of the reasons they pick Delaware versus other states is the future is uncertain. And we don't know how cases are going to come down. We don't know what business law issues are going to develop, right? They tend to move over time. And sometimes we get unusual court decisions, federal level, state level. And sometimes you want to update the law. Well, Delaware updates their laws generally every year, right? The new laws come, They go through the legislature and the statute, the LLC statute, the corporate statute. There's fixes. Basically what a lot of times what software type people would say is bug fixes, right? They fix the problems. That process continues. Delaware has so much filing, and they make so much revenue off the filing fees, and it's such a center of business activity that the state legislature really prioritizes that. Versus a state like Florida. I just did a video on a different channel talking about the Florida legislature, right? Florida legislature meets for 2 months every other year, 2 months every year, different times, depending on the year, right? And Florida, Texas, California, yeah, they have a lot of business happening. They got a lot of entities formed in those states. But it's just one of many issues to the Florida legislature. To the Delaware legislature, this is part of their significant revenue base. It's part of what makes Delaware Delaware. So they are going to make time to update the business law. The Florida legislature, Texas legislature, California legislature, they may only revisit this once in a while, right? It doesn't have the political push behind it. So that uncertainty of the future, the ability to evolve the laws, is one of the reasons that states matter and why it matters what state you're in. But it's one of the reasons people pick Delaware versus other states, is because they can trust that law is probably going to be updated and updated in a reasonable manner, right? Because the Delaware laws tend to get updated. It'd be one thing if some special interest group was moving it, in a bad direction, but generally it gets updated in a fair way that it works for most companies. So that uncertainty is another reason why state law matters so much. Another piece I'll throw in here is litigation before we wind up. It's possible that you're going to end up in business litigation. Many states now are experimenting with business court systems. Delaware has long had a basically dedicated business court system because the way Delaware evolved its court system, they for a long time have had one track of courts that have largely been focused on business issues. If you end up in litigation, you want to be in front of a judge that understands business and understands business litigation. Delaware has long offered that. Now, other states are jumping into that game and setting up their business court tracks and trying to be part of that similar system, right? So that the judges that you're getting really are thinking about business issues regularly and not just visiting them among a variety of other hearings they might be having. So that's another reason why you may want to jump in to a particular state, right? So we haven't gone into which state and why. You've heard a lot about Delaware just because Delaware kind of defaults as a big player in the room in picking the state. But these types of issues are considered. There are some states that are good for other things. Maryland's very good for real estate investment trusts. Massachusetts was a leader in business trusts, right? So there may be other states you would pick for other reasons. We can jump into that more in another video too, if you have a desire. I learned a lot from you folks, from your writing in and from your comments. So drop me some comments. Let me know what you specifically want to talk about. Again, not legal advice, just some tips and pointers, but I think this gives you a good idea about why state law is so important in the U.S. If you're wondering about it, would love to read your comments. Did this clarify things for you? Did it open up new questions? Let me know. I'll learn from you, and if there's a need, I may do some additional content in some new areas. All right, folks, thanks for tuning in today. Shawn.